So hope all is well on your end with the whole pandemic situation.
Yeah, everything is good. We were actually not in a hot spot, but over the last few weeks, things have picked up a little bit, but nothing too bad.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
How are things in the Delhi area and in general in India?
Numbers are going up here. I think most of Delhi is fairly kind of is a kind of a red zone. There's talk about it being turning orange now. But I think numbers, last I saw, we were probably seeing around 60,000 cases across the country. Unfortunately, the number of people losing their lives is increasing too. So
that's sad, right?
So let's see. Of course, there's a lot of talk about the fact that the true numbers are maybe tenfold, of what is being reported.
Right, reporting is an issue, and then we don't know the denominator, right? Because there are a lot of asymptomatic people, so that's a whole debate that's been going on in any case. So.
Yeah.
And the audio is good. You folks can hear me well?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
You could be sitting in the same room as us.
No, that's perfect.
So I know, Ganesh, you are mentoring a number of startups here in India as well as in the US. Have they all kind of managed to ride the wave? I mean, in terms of, have they been impacted by this whole scenario, or not too bad?
Depends on which vertical they are in, right? So you and I know Path Factory, they, I think, had the best quarter because that's a, as you folks call it, COVID positive business model, right? Digitization of sales. So no sales are happening face to face. So things like that are being helped. And likewise, folks doing more sort of knowledge work, enabling those folks are being helped. I've got a travel-related startup, business travel-related startup. So obviously, those folks are hunkering down and trying to figure out when things will really open up, right?
So. Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing that, I mean, obviously there are verticals, like you said, we always hear about how Zoom has gained a great deal of value out of this because everybody has just taken to it like fish to water. But also, I believe, healthy living at home is another area that is exploding, right? So, equipment being delivered to keep fit at home or track you. I think, in your progress, they seem to be also doing very well, I believe.
Correct. And I think from a knowledge working standpoint, I was talking to some senior folks on the East Coast, senior in both aspects. They're sort of above 60 and also have a lot of wisdom. Usually these people are very hard to get a hold of because they are nonstop traveling, right? And they go across the country for like a 2-hour meeting, but then are forced into sort of a dinner or whatever. And these are, and we're all not getting younger as well, right? So it takes a lot out of them. But those folks now are able to contribute sort of 8-10 hours of wisdom, if you will, to folks across the world, right? I mean, these are, I'm talking about folks from like the Harvard Business School or thought leaders. So the leverage of using their expertise is sort of amazing. So I think we'll see a whole area of startups or, using such people's expertise or folks who maybe, who may have some special needs, so normally wouldn't be traveling and then the Zoom and so on weren't as facile, right? Not that the technology wasn't available. It's that folks weren't using it, right? Like the physicians were reluctant to use telemedicine, but now, they're all over it, right? Because they don't want to get sick.
Yeah, very true. And I guess another COVID positive for us is the fact that we've been able to get your time to give us a talk today. And not that I'm sure we wouldn't have been able to get you earlier, but with your travel, it's probably reduced a great deal too, right? I know you would do a few, trips to India and across the world. So, have
Sure.
you seen a big change in your lifestyle as well as a result?
Not much travel, actually, along with some Thai folks. We just had an outdoor dinner. I saw Atul after a few months,
Okay,
along with some other folks just day before yesterday.
brilliant.
And
Okay.
before that, one of the larger events I went to, we still did only elbow, whatever was Jaime's memorial service in like late February, early March. So I hadn't been to any sort of group events for several months.
Okay, well, I think it's the time that we had kind of slotted in to start your talk, so we should get started. So I'll, pass it on to you. Obviously, the folks here have heard about you from me and otherwise too. And Ganesh, we look forward to getting a lot of wisdom from you today, given your exposure, with the Carnegie Mellon, as well as, of course, with your startup experience and your mentoring of startup ideas. As you know, the objective of Sabudh is to get, new blood into the AI machine learning space by training them, getting them to work on some social good projects during the training here for 6 months, and then for us to inspire them to actually go out and create startups of their own, right? And I think you cover all of those dimensions of academia, entrepreneurship, and of course a depth of knowledge in the machine learning space as well. So we look forward to your talk. Thank you again for taking the time out to talk to us. You had mentioned that you want this to be interactive. Would you want questions to be typed out into the text box here, and then for you, you can stop during your talk and answer some of those questions, or do you want to keep the questions till the end and have more of the interaction at the end?
Actually, I have the screen sharing on, so I don't see the chat window. What we can do is if there are any quick questions during the talk clarification, just feel free to speak up, sort of, just interrupt me. And likewise, give me some sort of a warning at the 45-minute mark so that we leave plenty of time for questions. And after that, we can do either chat or you can sort of, if you want to monitor the questions, sometimes there's an overlap between a couple of questions, right? So you can combine them and I can answer them. So happy to take as many questions and we can go over an hour if you folks are okay as well.
We are, like sponges. Whenever we have speakers come to us, we are in no rush to let them go. So, going over the hour is not a problem at all. But of course, we will be cognizant of the time that we don't go way over for your sake as well. So thank you, Ganesh, and I'll hand over to you. Look forward to hearing your talk.
Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks for this opportunity and welcome everybody, whoever has dialed in. There might be some folks outside of the Sabudh organization as well that got the link. So thank you for attending and let Saurabh know if you have any questions. So I sort of titled this AI in Health, Wealth, and Wisdom. So it's a little bit of a tour. I wouldn't call it the grand tour, but pockets of sort of wisdom or sights, if you will, on this journey that I've encountered. And there are some issues that sort of came out of this. So I thought I'll make this sort of interesting and make it from a 30,000-foot view. So with respect to AI, there's a little bit of confusion. Again, some of you folks may know this given Saurabh's excellent teaching there, but people ask, there's a lot of buzz around deep learning, right? So I just wanted to put this up. AI includes a lot of things like search, inference, that's sort of the outer circle there. Machine learning is a subset of AI, and then deep learning is obviously a proper subset of machine learning. So you sort of see that in a Venn diagram format. We'll talk a little bit about data, which is on the outside the models. So I sort of call this a triad, right? The data is important, the domain knowledge is important, and then the models tend to be the third aspect. There's a lot of focus that's gone into the tools over the last few years. I think, in my opinion, some of the focus is now shifting back to data. There are a number of issues with respect to whether the data is clean, how is it normalized, and so on. And there are a few other things on this slide: augmented intelligence, opinion versus fact, some caveats like beware of overfitting in machine learning. So we'll sort of come back to that in some of the discussion as we go forward here. And this is sort of an example of, even though this is going to be a high level talk, I just wanted to highlight there are some very important metrics, for instance, in machine learning, precision, recall. I've put up sort of the definitions of them. I'm sure Sarab, again, can spend 20 minutes in one of the classes if he hasn't already done that, getting into some of these nuances and so on. But it's important to keep in mind that there are deeper quantitative metrics that are important, even though, you know, this talk will be at a high level. And these are things you folks can sort of look up if you know the keywords and want to be reminded of them. So what's sort of the goal of AI, right? And also with respect to machine learning, humans are inundated with a lot of data, and we want to go from data to insights, right? So somebody who's not seeped in AI or machine learning, it may be we talk about health, wealth, and wisdom, right? So it may be a clinician, it may be a wealth advisor, it may be a teacher on the wisdom side. They are now inundated with a lot of data. What they're trying to gather is can they get from data to insights? So as you go from data to insights, the intermediate representations can be important. And if things can be summarized in sort of rules, explainable formats, that's usually a win as well. So reducing complexity is sort of a meta goal of AI and machine learning. And in terms of sort of the process, since now we have these technologies being fairly mature, we're deploying something after validating it. What happens, especially in a machine learning sort of format, is, or even in other sort of search optimization and so on, there tends to be drift because the data changes, because the environment changes. There's a lot of drift with these models. It's not you deploy once and you can use it sort of ad infinitum. So you've got to monitor for the drift. You've got to decide when to potentially retrain or recalibrate the models and so on. And these are, again, very nuanced decisions, but from a production quality system, a lot of folks, especially academics, you know, they publish a paper used on using the models on a static a database or a standardized data set, but in the real world, as you go forward, these are some very interesting issues to keep in mind. So this is a mantra I sort of came up with, you know, harkening back to some of the things folks say here. I call it off the people, by the people, with machines, for the people, right? So this is sort of a precursor to the whole augmented intelligence, right? And machines are what many would consider useful, clever, or intelligent. And why do you need augmented intelligence? Because humans still are very good at the creativity part, judgment, soft skills, right? Sometimes there's negotiation involved, diplomacy. You have to bring in common sense. A lot of the machine capabilities currently, which I'll get to in a second, is narrow. It doesn't include common sense. As somebody said, common sense is very uncommon. And we were able to recognize a lot of what folks call IROPS, irregular operations. You see sort of a gorilla in the middle of a city. You can sort of know how to sort of handle that, right? You say maybe it's escaped from the zoo. Maybe I better go indoors. Or if you see children, you say, go indoors now. I don't know why there's animals out there and so on. Machines would get very easily confused by such scenarios. So the other aspect is, there's a lot of debate with respect to bias and so on. And I say, which we'll get to, there are a couple of slides later in the presentation, a lot of the designing and training of the AI, selection of the data, the domain knowledge, all the things in the triad I talked about, currently is done by humans. So humans select the data, prep the data, humans bring in the domain knowledge, and humans actually end up building the models and training it and so on. So a lot of the command and control, if you will, is done by the humans. So we need to sort of recognize that. But you can combine that with the native machine capabilities. Machines are very good at number crunching. They're systematic. They have a lot of stamina, right? I just woke up a couple hours ago, had to get a good night's sleep, right? But machines could be running 24/7. They're generally repeatable. Now we're coming to more of heuristic computers, and with quantum and so on, things may not be fully repeatable, but we are used to sort of the silicon model where things 2 + 2 is always 4, but there are calculations, the analog world, soap bubbles, other things, they generally tend to be in this sort of 2 + 2 = approximately 4 sort of mode. And that may be fine. You just need to use it in appropriate ways. But currently, it's good to think of generally repeatable, trainable type of attributes for the machine. And then when you combine the best of the human and the machine, I think you can get abilities that are superior to both. And that's sort of the philosophy behind augmented intelligence, or sometimes I call it sort of the HuMachine framework. And like we mentioned at the outset, for AI, there are many spheres of applicability. I try to think of these as 3 broad health, wealth, and wisdom spheres. So if you think about it, this is what, as humans, we sort of broadly seek in our, as we go through life. We seek added health, added wealth, added wisdom. And if you aggregate these from the micro level to the macro level, this is what ends up being important for the world at large as well. And we'll try to get into each one of these spheres as we go through the presentation here. And this is tongue-in-cheek. Language and understanding tends to be a building block on the, and these are cartoons from an acquaintance of mine, ex-IITian, I believe, Sunil Agarwal. I think it's in some of the local newspapers there now. Some extraterrestrials saying, their language is very simple, good morning and happy birthday. And then at the other extreme, we have, nobody reads the pages of terms and conditions, right? So these are sort of the 2 extremes. And it tends to be a tough problem for machines to sort of make sense of figures of speech or make sense of large legal documents, but I thought I'll sort of put it out there. And then you cannot outsource everything to AI, right? Here is a gentleman enjoying the working from home lifestyle. And so one of the things I looked at over the last few months, I had a conversation with one of my mentors, Turing Award winner and sort of thought leader here at CMU, Raj Reddy. So I sat in his office, I think this was pre-pandemic, last year sometime. I said, Raj, you wrote a paper, and he was the president then of AAAI, the flagship organization. And as part of his presidential address, he had come up with grand challenges for the next 30 years, and that was published in AI magazine. So you folks can look at the actual article if you Google Raj Reddy AI magazine 1988. So he had proposed a number of challenges for the next 30 years. And I said, Raj, 30 years are up, right? Where are we? He said, no, it's good to take stock. So I've actually written this up. Hopefully it'll get published in the next few months in terms of where we are. And then I'll get to what are some challenges in the health, wealth, and wisdom spheres going forward for the next decade, because there's been a quickening. Instead of 30 years, I picked sort of a 10-year time period. And I thought this would be a good overview for us to get into here. So Raj had proposed the world champion chess machine. That was actually pretty quickly solved right here at CMU, then with an assist from IBM, primarily for the hardware speed up, and the Fredkin Prize was awarded for that in 1997. Mathematical discovery, I would say minor discoveries have been done, translating telephone, mostly done Google, Microsoft, they all have their translation apps. Now some other vendors have them as well. Maybe the form factor can be improved, but I would say that's mostly done. Accident avoiding car, I'd say that's a little more nuanced. It's more than halfway done. There is SAE here, which is the Society of Automotive Engineers. They're the ones that classify all the way up to level 5, where level 5 is fully self-driving, where you may not even have a steering wheel or a gas pedal or brakes that are accessible to you. Everything is done by the car. We're not quite there yet, and we've had some setbacks. We had it had to happen sometime, right? Unfortunately, so we had the first pedestrian fatality due to an Uber car a couple of years ago. That got a lot of press, and then folks are now talking about the ethics relative to the car knows it's going to crash. Should it swerve left to hit a pedestrian potentially? If there are multiple passengers in the car, what's sort of the relative value of one pedestrian versus 3 or 4 passengers and so on. So there's a lot of debate going on, which again, we'll come back to around the bias and fairness theme. But for the purposes of tabulating where we are with respect to the 1988 grand challenges, I'd say we're only halfway there with respect to the accident avoiding car. A self-organizing system, these are things that sort of ant colonies, bots that can make decisions while cooperating. There's a whole field of swarm computation. And recently, I think sort of the East Coast, some work on this Xenobot-based systems, essentially bringing the cells into the picture as well. So you can think of these as sort of robotic cells. There's some very interesting work there, which you can again Google and get some more information on. And the self-replicating systems are very interesting. These are, I think we're just scratching the surface there for like Mars colonization, or now that we've had the pandemic, some of these things, even when we talked about it last year, other folks, Raj and I thought, creating sort of a backup to Silicon Valley. There's always this fear of, I think it was last October when I was there in the Silicon Valley doing some things. I felt the tremors at 10 p.m. I was just sitting down to sort of read some email and get some work done before retiring for the night. And I said, are those tremors that I felt? I was in Foster City at my sister's place. And sure enough, you get on Twitter and people are talking about an earthquake. So if you have a big earthquake in California, how do you create sort of a backup, people, some of them have to migrate to adjoining states, even simple things like healthcare for them, day-to-day things, it becomes very interesting. And then the whole infrastructure, if a financial exchange, if New York gets affected, what do you do with the whole financial markets and so on? Likewise, hospital infrastructure. These are important things to think about. And post-pandemic, I think some of these things folks will be talking about quite a bit. And then Roger also talked about sort of sharing knowledge and know-how. That I think has become fairly more widespread. So there's an efficient framework in place. Google and others um, sort of enabled by the internet have made that possible. Remember, some of these challenges were proposed pre-internet. It was late 80s, while the internet arguably sort of mid 90s when things became widespread, right? So what are some future grand challenges in the spheres we're talking about today? So I've tried to put down, these are sort of my characterizations in the health field. And again, I come up with some of these pre-pandemic, and I think they are pretty applicable post-pandemic as well. So is there a nursing home with 90% of the care being performed by robots? That could be an interesting grand challenge. And that would have, if that had been solved, it would have helped in the current scenario, because at least in the US, number of the deaths have been in the nursing home, because there are these caregivers who oscillate between different patients, and they've been carriers and so on. Can you come up with an assistant for a patient with dementia, where you can define performance thresholds based on satisfaction rates, other things, so on. Wearable device that for people like us who are going through normal life, but can you come up with a reliable alert? Even for COVID-19, people are saying actually there are some wearable devices that can give you, when you combine things like fever and some other things, generally you're feeling sluggish, so you're not as mobile and so on. The devices can pick up some early warning things, which could be very interesting. And then automatically, if you have a heart attack or whatever, can it call 911, which is sort of the ambulance that you would call here. So that's on the health grand challenges. On the wealth side, likewise, can you have a thrift assistant? Can you have things in the background that are already looking at your information relative to your mortgage or auto payments, negotiating lower payments if interest rates have dropped and so on. Likewise for senior citizens, if there are social security payments, other things, and these folks may not be digitally as savvy as we are, can you still have apps and other things that sort of make sure the benefits are coming without any interruption and so on. Likewise, savings related for retirement, big purchases. So these are sort of, I've classified them as large functional challenges. And I think with progress in fintech, some of these things are possible in a sort of ersatz way, but the form factor and making it happen behind the scenes with attention to security, privacy, etc., is still a grand challenge in my opinion. And then moving on to the wisdom sphere, some interesting, challenging cases which we haven't seen yet are successfully arguing a criminal or a civil case in front of a judge, right? So I'm not sure whether the AI system acting as the plaintiff would be harder, or would defending be harder? So that's something to think about. And another interesting thing, there's been some news over the last couple of weeks about GPT-3, right, from OpenAI, which produces text. You give it one line of Jerome K. Jerome or Shakespeare, it'll come up with a couple of paragraphs. Some of it, people say, is at the high school or +2 level. Folks have been sort of debating that, but it's very challenging to come up with sort of I showed you a couple of cartoons earlier. The New Yorker tends to be a fairly interesting cartoon forum here, and they have a caption contest, I think, pretty much every issue. So winning that cartoon caption contest would be an interesting challenge and benchmark. Elementary or middle school pedagogy. And again, given COVID, this is a very interesting challenge where can you do 80-90% of the pedagogy just using the AI system. So these are some challenges. Some subtasks from here would be things you folks can work on for your projects. Think about it, at least what are the building blocks that are required to solve these challenges. This is so, obviously those challenges are not there in a vacuum. There are a lot of people, companies, researchers making progress. And this is from CB Insights, sort of the AI 100 companies, mostly startups, but mature startups from last year. So there are a lot of automobile ones on top by vertical, I don't have the time to get into all of these, but I'm happy to send this slide, or if you Google AI 100 and CB1 Insights, you can sort of take a look. There are some robotic automation, robotic RPA, robotic process automation ones, UiPath at the bottom there. A lot of interesting things, both on the infrastructure side, data management, cybersecurity, to sort of these verticals we've been talking about, the broad health, wealth, wisdom spheres. And this tends to change a little bit. This is sort of the list from this year. So there's some GovTech, government and city planning, which is becoming interesting as well, because we've had, on the one hand, the self-driving cars and so on are coming down the pike, so to speak. And then the COVID-19 and those sort of things are changing things like government and city planning, changing things like education, and so on. So some very interesting companies here. Again, we don't have the time to go into these in detail, but I'll get into some of the health, wealth related deep dives here as we go forward. But this is sort of a high-level view of mature startups, many of them are unicorns. And this is a McKinsey report which sort of breaks things down by vertical, where AI adoption is leading. So if you sort of look at this, this was, so the larger the bubble, that means the adoption is a little higher. They did a survey, and this is sort of the percentage of people in that vertical saying they're using sort of machine learning or robotic process automation or autonomous vehicles and so on. So in the high-tech area, in automobile, in telecom, we broadly see more proliferation of AI. Areas like infrastructure, maybe professional services, I think the adoption is still at a very low or modest level. So there's a lot of growth. And I think, again, with respect to COVID-19, now we're seeing a lot of AI go behind the scenes into sort of processing the data. I'll show you some examples on the just making sense of the data. But there's a lot of data going into the vaccine and drug development as well. Those are shown as smaller bubbles here. So there's a lot of potential work that can still be done there. So these are all the, so we're diving into sort of the health sphere a little bit here. These are FDA approvals for AI-based algorithms over the last, I think this covers maybe the time period from 2004 or so, I believe. So several dozen, and this is not an exhaustive list. So there are companies like Zebra or Terrace. I was involved with a company called iCAD actually since the mid-90s. So these folks, it was actually the wife of one of my employees who founded the company, was the second reader for mammograms. So in those days, mammograms used to be all film. Maybe some parts of India, it's still film, but here it's become fully digital. It was 2D, now they've gone to 3D tomosynthesis and so on. And then as part of that, it's also some sub-problems like the breast density and so on. So that's one area where I would say there's been a lot of work over the last couple of decades, except companies like iCAD didn't get that much press. I think the Google DeepMind folks came up with an algorithm last year, and then there was a lot of press, but I don't believe that's FDA approved and so on. There are smaller companies that have been doing these sorts of things. Likewise, at the bottom, I also listed things like heart failure screening, e-murmur. So there are now stethoscopes, and this is sort of interesting for telemedicine. You can have one part of the stethoscope in your home, and then through the app and via the web, a cardiologist halfway across the world or halfway across the city can listen to your heartbeat and sort of diagnose things and so on. And this is, my wife is actually a bioinformatician. She, when I said I'm going to be talking about these things, she sort of sent me this slide. This is sort of enabling precision cardiology, right? Using multiple sources of data. So you'd have sort of the clinical examination, right? Either remote or in person. A lot of the times the physician actually gets a lot out of a physical examination, either in person or now via telemedicine, because he can sort of see how the patient's feeling, ask some questions and so on. So broadly, in my mind, that's one source of information, the clinical examination. Then the other source of information typically comes from the lab tests, right? So serum, blood, those sort of tests. And again, it's not a point estimate. It's including for a lot of these sort of where you are and where you're coming from, how have those lab readings changed. If the physician's doing an exam, you know, is the patient feeling more energetic, less energetic, right? If you have a relationship with the physician, they can pick up on these things pretty quickly. And then combining that with, I think the third piece of information is sort of the imaging and genetics-based information. And then if you combine that with bioinformatics databases, sort of the background knowledge about the population and so on, you can get to some very interesting personalized interventions. So you take these spheres of information from a clinical exam, from labs, from imaging and genetics, come up with an intervention, and then there's feedback, right? Is the intervention working or not? And then you redo the same thing. You see if it's a cancer treatment, you do the intervention, and then you see the lab test, the imaging tell you whether the tumor is shrinking, whether the T cell counts and so on are going in the right direction and so on. And then you can change your intervention and so on. That's sort of the cycle. Things are becoming much more the search, the prediction, if you will, of the right personalized treatments becoming much more facile using AI and machine learning. That's sort of the summary here. And this is sort of tongue-in-cheek. Here are a couple of animals that have, you know, digested one meal, and they're saying, I still have room for a second opinion. So I thought that's sort of pretty humorous, since primarily AI is used for a second opinion, if you will, in the field of medicine. So Profound AI is sort of this entity or product from ICAD, the entity I was involved with. I just wanted to put that up there. And Deep Medicine is a book by Eric Topol. He's a thought leader and now was a practicing physician, now is at the Scripps Institute here on the West Coast as an EVP. If any of you are going to work in sort of the health IT area, you may enjoy reading that book. So now, since we are within the health bucket, I want to come to COVID-19 and sort of again show you a couple of things. I ended up looking at a number of data things, wrote a little article called Data is the Best Vaccine, right? So the idea behind that was, you know, it's not one or the other with respect to health of the people versus health of the economy. There was a lot of debate about opening and so on. So the best approach is let's follow the data, right? So depending on what the data is telling you, you may have to throttle vigilance. You folks can look it up. Something I wrote up a couple of months ago. And then I went back and looked at, what are folks doing in India with respect to the forecasts and so on. So there's a group called epiforecast.io. I think these are folks, researchers from London that have been looking at the data from India and have been creating these graphs. Actually, there's also the founder of Instagram, Kevin Systrom. He's got a site called rt.live, which takes current data and tries to sort of predict whether the each infection is infecting more than one person, which means, we still have growth, or less than one person, sort of taking the concept of R naught and trying to make it more real-time oriented for RT. And I think there were some students in India who may have logged in on this call. I'm not sure. They were trying to take the data from India and do that RT analysis for India as well. If they do, maybe they can publish a web page and so on. But this epiforecast.io webpage, this is work as of early July, which meant it used data from end of June, because people went in for the COVID tests, and the tests usually are not available until a few days later. So as you can see, it showed that things were increasing in India, most of India, in the time period end of June, early July. And I think we were just chatting about how things are there at the beginning of this call. And on the right-hand side here this is sort of interesting. Everybody's talking about the vaccines and so on, but what is sort of the immunity, right? So these are things they've done with the other viruses. The SARS-CoV-2, we don't know yet. We know it affects the respiratory system, but post-infection, do you get some sort of protection forever, or do you only get it for 1 or 2 years, right? So this sort of tells you that potentially, the immunity might be limited by time. So which means you may have to get vaccines sort of every year or once every few years and so on. So these are, again, areas, two ends of the spectrum here, right? From predicting spread of infection all the way down to sort of analyzing the immunity and so on. And there's a role for using data, using AI, using sort of the right models, along with some of the biology experiments, if you will. I just wanted to give you sort of the bookends of some of the things going on in the field. This is a slide I took from some of my other financial related work. So this is what we call sort of a quad chart, which summarizes things in one slide. So I have a target cloud architecture on the top right-hand side for a market prediction sort of task, right? So a lot of market systems, APIs, and here what's going on is, we currently combine what I would call traditional data, which is things coming from the stock market, things coming from companies that have reported into the regulatory authorities like the SEC. And then you've got to combine things like, how many people these days, folks are wondering how many people are actually flying. So the TSA, for instance, here, the security checkpoint at the airport, those folks are releasing data weekly saying, here are the people, number of people going through the checkpoints, right? Which gives you alternative data about travel, how much is it down compared to last year. And here in the US currently, air travel is still down about 70, 80%, and so on, which is sort of interesting. So combining all that data into making predictions, either for risk management or asset allocation or security selection. So I show sort of an architecture. This is sort of one area where I've done a fair amount of work in the industry. And the common theme here again is can smart assistants be helpful? Can you combine all the new sources of data, use either ensemble methods, active learning, transfer learning? These are hopefully things Sarab is covering in the curriculum. And how do you make reliable predictions? And then also do some sort of sensitivity analysis. I'm on the um, top left here, sensitivity analysis of sort of critical uncertainties, which are the things, currently post COVID-19, everybody said the data is so different, right? We've had, be it unemployment numbers, be it sort of volatility in the stock market, we got moves that folks hadn't seen either forever or in decades. So it required very interesting and different kind of analysis rather than machine learning, which tends to work well if the data you're seeing out of sample is very similar to what you used for training. So people had to sort of use either extreme value analysis or some other kinds of analysis. A lot of the traditional machine learning techniques were very brittle for not only the stock market sort of analysis, but even in predicting demand of CPG packaged goods, right? Folks were rationally buying sort of toilet paper here and loading up on things like even paper towels and so on. And then some of the things, there's an increased whatever on hygiene. So folks were buying more Lysol and Clorox things, Dettol related things, which made sense. And then, as somebody said, tongue in cheek, people are using less mouthwash and antiperspirants, but maybe more lipstick, right? Because everybody is on Zoom and so on and socially distanced. So things like that. So, what are some things you can pick up from the data? So with respect to finance is a large field, but you folks should be sort of thinking about generally risk management at the top end, be it for insurance. And then on the other areas, it is, you may be constructing a portfolio. I would say from a fintech standpoint, if you folks are working on some problems, think about, somebody is earning a paycheck, what are sort of the uses of it? They may be saving for retirement or for education, or they may be deciding how to sort of spend it over the next few years, either for basic necessities, rent, other things, and maybe travel, some discretionary spending. So if you sort of bucket that from first principles and then use the right data to make some predictions, you can pick up some interesting trends. And in terms of sort of a timeline and technique, this is the bottom right-hand side. We've seen an evolution from statistical techniques, decision trees in the 80s. We went to sort of symbolic learning, which sort of matured in the 90s. And then, deep learning, there's been a lot of buzz currently over the last several years, but explainability is still an issue. And there are a number of hyperparameters there. So it's very nuanced with respect to, whether you should be using deep learning. Definitely for multimedia applications, it tends to work pretty well. But if you have simpler data, you might be better off using some of the older techniques and so on. And then this auto ML is the ability to take in trained models from, say, another domain, especially for text mining. It's helped quite a bit, having these sort of giant language models like BERT or FinBERT for financial and so on. And I'd also, at the bottom right-hand side there, I want to talk about some of the other related technologies, right? Other than AI, there's behavioral finance, quantum computing, blockchain-related innovations in the last several years. There is surveillance. We talked about the human-machine teaming, but also the ability to, humans are good at visualizing things on small amounts of data. So if they can visualize the data before deciding which model to use, what to model, that's interesting. And then game theory is more sort of simulation based, and given sort of where we are, a lot of the COVID simulations are forward looking. They're not really based on data. one of the developments from CMU here is this poker bot over the last few years that showed superhuman abilities, and that was based on game theory. So game theory is, again, something that would be interesting when you want to do simulations and the data is very different from what you're seeing from the past. So this is, again, sort of a quick overview of some of the financial things I've been involved in and some insights from that. These were some IARPA related research programs I was involved in. I don't have the time to go into them, but again, from the title, you can sort of see what the thrusts were: novel intelligence from massive data. This was actually done by the US government with the last strategic surprise, right, which was the September 2001 World Trade Center disaster here. And after that, people said we need to get more savvy about strategic surprises. They can come out of nowhere. So it was this finding a needle in the haystack. Actually, around that time, we had done some work with the SARS database as well, looking for unusual infection patterns and so on. I think there are a couple of slides around novelty. I'll sort of show you that. And this proactive intelligence concept is the next item I have here. You have a certain amount of data. If you need additional data to sort of solve the problem, what is the cost of getting that data? What is the benefit you derive from it? So if you're going to derive twice the benefit as the cost, it's worthwhile going and sending a probe or collecting that additional data. That's the concept behind this proactive intelligence. Metaphor was, again, an IARPA funded project. It is sort of making sense of, so when somebody says, the glass is half full, right? They're being optimistic. Or when somebody says life is a beach, they're being optimistic. So trying to generate sentiment. And now there's a startup I'm advising on. It's called Stock Snips. You folks can take a look at it. It's an app for every financial article. If it relates to a company or a stock, not at the document level, but at the snippet level, it tries to decide whether the snippets are positive or negative in terms of the affect implied. And then we also worked on some video analytics relating things. Novelty detection tends to be sort of an interesting sort of building block, again, in the COVID-19 sort of situation. It would be COVID being, in the early days, novel with respect to the background, which would be sort of this influenza-like illnesses, right? So can you detect that something is different from before? I think there is sort of a chart here. These are, again, visualization things that are human-friendly. This is my example about it could be COVID versus influenza, other influenza type of things, or it could be somebody trying to do something nefarious. That's the new obfuscated event, right? Bottom left-hand side. So you want to sort of blend in, but based on the density, you're trying to figure out whether there's something novel happening, either as a result of some new processes, new financial trends, new consumption trends, or it may be some bad guys doing something in an obfuscated fashion. But this is, again, one method to sort of get to detecting novelty or implying novelty. And as part of that, we did fast matching. And again, we don't have the time to get into the details. I think on bullet number 3, I think we used novelty detection, fast matching, and we had 3 different domains: the Fed, which is the Federal Reserve here, money transfer. Anything above $10,000 needs to be reported. So sometimes there are a lot of money transfers just below that threshold amount. Bad guys are transferring money, and money transfer tends to be an interesting domain for any homeland security or nefarious activity because it tends to be a harbinger, right? Nobody does anything without money in a capitalist society. So, the money transfer tends to precede both good and bad activities. So this is, so we covered some of the financial things, we covered some of the health things. This third sphere is what I would call the wisdom sphere, right? So we have tools like Google. On the one hand, knowledge has become democratic, it's become easier to use. But I think over the last few years, we've also seen some of the bad effects of social media, of having sort of knowledge which is not fully vetted. So, there is sort of truth, which some would argue, the philosophers would argue, maybe is unknowable. And then there are some folks, who say there are facts, there are opinions, and there may be opinions about facts, right? There may be, and the opinion could be based on, if the, like yesterday, there was a comment from the US president, right? He's thinking about banning TikTok, right? So is that now an opinion or does it become a fact in the US and so on? And what are sort of the steps that would sort of lead to it? But broadly, what's happened is people used to, I first heard this metaphor 20 years ago. My business partner used it when I said, I was going to work with him. He had some business problems. I brought the AI. So he said, oh, you're going to help me drink from a fire hose, right? His analogy was there's a lot of information and AI will help us find that needle in a haystack or drink from the fire hose. Now, the problem is the waters are muddy or even toxic, right? That's what's going on Facebook, on social media. It may be wrong information or questionable information. We've seen that with hydroxychloroquine, right? All over the world, very questionable. The data is at best inconclusive, but a lot of the early attempt by both the politicians and folks who sort of believed in it were to nudge folks to use it, and many countries started hoarding it. And then there have been high-profile cases of papers being published in prestigious journals like The Lancet, and they had bad data, then they had to be retracted and so on. So I think, and there's a whole field now emerging, it's called the science of science. So how do we control the quality of science, right? Again, you can look this up. This was an interesting paper from a couple of years ago from some thought leaders called The Science of Science in Science magazine itself. That's just on the scientific literature, but that's also happening with policy decisions, with what the common man has access to. This is again some work from CMU when we had this debate about a month and a half ago, and I think you folks are also having this debate, how to reopen the country relative to the health risk of COVID-19. There was a lot of activity on Twitter, and half the Twitter accounts that were pushing to reopen America were bots. So this is Kathleen Carley, who does a lot of very interesting social media analysis. But this whole area is very interesting because the rate of generation of information is very high. Humans can't keep up with it because there's a geometric rate of growth of information, and humans only have limited time, and we only have a limited number of people, experts or other things. So I think this is an area to sort of focus on and keep an eye on. And with respect to scientific publishing and so on, it mirrors what's going on in society, right? So, Science, the magazine used to publish things like, you had theories from physics like relativity or a new element or something deeply related to cells. But last year, one of the covers of Science magazine was Thomas Sandholm's work at CMU on the poker bot, right? So game theory based work. So my point is science itself is changing, and a lot of these are AI-based things. There's a new Nature journal called Nature Machine Intelligence, which talks about machine behavior and what things are happening. I like to use the metaphor of sort of atoms, bits, and cells, right? So there's a lot of innovation happening in bits, but they're affecting things on the atom side, right? How do we produce things? How do we move things efficiently? The whole supply chain effect, we're sort of moving from the just-in-time supply chain now to more of a just-in-case because COVID-19 sort of woke us up and said we need to prepare for these EROPs, if you will. Likewise, the in silico modeling is helping develop drugs faster, do experimentation with cells faster. And these are some attributes, right? So atoms have a lot of friction. I can do things in bits, simulate things much easily. Cost for replication is lower if it's an information good like Netflix, right? They can do things pretty easily overnight. Likewise, a financial product. But there are ethical issues with respect to things like facial recognition, which I'll sort of get to in one of the subsequent slides in cells, with all these vaccines, right? How fast should you go with vaccines? And that's the other thing that's going on. The speed of science can be detrimental to getting good science. So velocity of innovation on the one hand is helped by bits, but we need to be careful as well, especially when we're dealing with a crisis. There's a propensity to go too fast. I mean, even here, we have this program called Warp Speed for vaccines, but vaccines have bad effects if they're not 100% or close to 100% safe. So there's a trade-off there, which again needs to be kept in mind. These are, again, while we're on the this is not my work, somebody else's work, but I thought these were interesting mental models in the wisdom sphere. You could be thinking about things like learning how to learn, goal setting, sort of this cause and effect, right? Correlation and cause and effect, prioritization, which is very useful for humans, but also when machines need to prioritize, be it a self-driving car, right? There's a lot of things changing in the environment. And then there are financial concepts like compound interest. Somebody had sort of posted this on my LinkedIn feed, and I said, net present value is one of the things that could be added from the financial side. But cognitive biases, again, you can take a look at this offline if you Google 12 most useful mental models. And this is a way to, again, get some of these AI techniques working with what we know to build this meta framework, right? And then it becomes a very interesting problem-solving toolbox. These are some things I wrote up last year, more for the Indian audience. I think Sabudh and I did a workshop a couple of years ago in Bangalore, and somebody asked about sort of what does it mean to say made in India AI, because I think at that time the trade wars, the provenance of where something is being manufactured or done, would that have implications for AI as well? So again, I sort of broke this up into data, tools, and domain knowledge. And the point with this Made in India AI was, you need to use local know-how and local data for an AI project to be effective in that jurisdiction. So you should be using data from India about Indian people and using sort of some of the mores, some of the domain knowledge there so that things are utile for the Indian context. And likewise, I think early this year, just before COVID, people said the last decade was about smartphones, right? So I wrote up a little thought piece called Goodbye Smartphone. Is the current decade going to be more of smarter humans? And that gets to the whole, we need to be smarter about using AI. We need to be smarter about fairness, being bias-free. These are some examples from the local milieu here. One is the caveats around facial recognition. There was this gentleman who was uh, wrongly arrested based on facial recognition, which is one of the failures. And then this doesn't have anything to do with AI, but this is a human use case, which again, we don't want to replicate in the AI field. So on the bottom left-hand side, there's a gentleman who got a settlement for race discrimination, went to the bank to deposit that check. And the irony was they wouldn't believe him and they wouldn't cash the check, right? So it's very interesting. And these are some of the things we want AI to prevent. And this is, since you folks focus on data science for social good, I thought this is a definitely important area to stress across this whole health, wealth, and wisdom sphere. And I would say spheres, and I think it's part of being wise about these things is designing AI to be from the get-go fair and bias-free. This is some of Ray Ghani, who Sarab knows very well. He's now at CMU. His work on trying to predict recidivism, right? A lot of the times folks want to predict if somebody is in jail, when they get out, are they going to exhibit criminal behavior again, and so on. And that tends to be a tricky problem because the data can be biased. So there's some interesting work that Raid and others have done. So I just wanted to highlight that here. And then broadly, we should be thinking about the UN has come up with these sustainable development goals, right? Things like no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, good health and well-being. And it is a bit nuanced, right? AI is generally helpful for 80% of the cases. It can have negative impacts, right? Take deep learning, for instance, it's very power hungry because we use GPUs and so on. So from a climate change perspective, that could have a negative impact. So you need to sort of trade off. This is I have the reference there on people have done surveys and people have looked at each one of the tasks within these sustainable development goals. And even here, now that we've gone to remote education, if you're in the bottom quartile by economic status, which means the kids don't have access to, and this would be very similar in India as well. They won't have access to Wi-Fi. They won't have access to all the digital tools or a good laptop or tablet, which means education suffers, right? So you can use AI, but the digital divide and the economic divide tends to further exacerbate some of these effects of AI and so on. So I think we're getting to the close here. Some of the responsible AI considerations, explainability, bias-free, how do you team not only with humans, but also, different machines will want to team amongst themselves. So eventually, as we go forward now, we're going to see large teams that are comprised of both humans as well as multiple machines, right? And one of the things I wrote up at the bottom is, self-reflection, right, as a meta grand challenge for AI. So a lot of the times how we exhibit bias-free behavior, or when we are faced with ethical challenges, we reflect and say, have I been fair, right? Be it in an employment scenario or, dealing with your kids, friends, and we sort of course correct. Every action of ours may not be bias free, but over time we say, over the last year, I did XYZ, so now I need to hire maybe from this sort of protected group or from this minority group, because my last 3 hires were from this category or from this college or what have you. So just that self-reflection as an individual, as an institution, can perhaps correct some of these biases. There are some classic readings. Sarab, I'm sure, is familiar with them, but for you youngsters, Flowers for Algernon, Animal Farm, these are all interesting books. If you, I sometimes wonder whether the next generation is reading the same things we read. So I just wanted to put that out there. And one of the metaphors I use for AI is actually fire, right? So fire is something that had to be tamed. It was very useful when the cavemen discovered or invented it. And by fire, I mean the different incarnations of it, right? All the way to bombs, hydrogen bombs, what have you. So we've had this ethical debate, is fire good, is fire bad, for the last million years. And that's how I think about AI. Not some folks have made the electricity metaphor, but I think that's probably not the more apt one. So you folks should be thinking about sort of the fire metaphor when you think about AI. And this is, from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. It says, this is the Red Queen telling Alice, now here you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. So I want to leave you guys with that. Everybody needs to work harder, because there are a lot of interesting things that have already been done, and there are a lot of smart people working on these problems. So I thought I'd leave you with this quote, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. That was brilliant. I think you've covered so many areas within your talk, from the need for an unbiased availability of data, to explainability of the AI, so that we can actually trust what is coming out of the predictions that the machine learning algorithms are giving us. And of course, many more than that. Let me just have a look through the questions here. The first question is, when we talk about AI or data science for social good, how does it fit into CSR, or corporate social responsibility? How corporates should take its benefits to create a larger impact on society through its projects?
No, that's an excellent question. In fact, I was talking just last week with some thought leaders. There's a big debate. The whole concept here was this whole Milton Friedman's "the business of business is business," right? Which is now being currently, that theme is being rewritten. So, it's sort of multi-stakeholder perspective. Even boards need to be sort of forward-looking. So all the stakeholders, right? So we need to think about a corporation as having a longer life. You need to be corporation centric, and there are multiple stakeholders, right? It's not just the shareholders, it is the customers, it's the employees. And if you take that longer term view, then it's beneficial for everybody. Unfortunately, a lot of the board members, we saw that with Boeing, we saw that with General Electric, they were all very short-term focused, which meant, and their incentives were short-term focused. So Boeing was buying back a lot of stock. And now, they sort of realize it would be nice to have tens of billions on their balance sheet instead of buying back stock and so on. So I think that's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of debate, and I think we'll see capitalism be nudged in the right direction.
Thanks, Ganesh. Another question is, what area do you think is still untouched by AI?
I think currently, I don't know whether you mean it shouldn't be touched, or whether it's sort of greenfield. I think a lot of the artistic things, right? Humor, can AI help you sort of make movies, help you with concerts, dance programs, right? My wife does some Indian classical dance, Bharatanatyam, she thinks about some of these things. So I think, again, anything that's sort of creative, I think there's a great Wyden and Kennedy sports a video that's going around in the last couple of days. It's a very creative. Apparently, they went through 4,000 video clips or whatever. It combines sports with social justice, and I looked at it and said, wow, that's interesting creativity. So I think tools were used along with some creative types who generated it. So I think a lot of the creative areas are still wide open.
There was also a question, well, actually more of a request to talk a little bit more about the application of AI in behavioral finance from your experience, in the finance industry and applying AI. Could you give us some more insights into what are the interesting challenges that exist there, where folks here can work on the behavioral finance?
With respect to behavioral science or behavioral finance?
Finance, sorry. Yeah, finance.
Yeah, so in the short term, the stock market, right, is a voting device, right? So, on the one hand, for every buyer, there's a seller, right? So every, share of Reliance that's sold is also bought. But if there are more sellers than buyers on a particular day, the stock is going to go down, right? I mean, that's the, but as some people say, over the medium to long term, it's more of a weighing machine, right? So it sort of takes into account sort of valuation and other things. But like we're seeing with Tesla, some of these sort of, or a lot of the digital platform names here, there's a bit of a bubble, right? Because everybody's sort of buying it. And here, what happened just before the pandemic hit, we took all the trading costs down to zero, at least the commissions. I mean, there's still market impact and so on. So that, and then people were working from home, they had no entertainment. They said, oh, the stock market's entertaining. And that's what I used to say even 10 years ago when we had the gambling debates here, should gambling be legalized? I said the stock and the option markets are open to everybody in all the states. And that's what the Robin Hooders, as they're called here, they've sort of taken up. So there are sites like robintrack.net. Actually, it's a one-man operation. I talked to the engineer last year. Now everybody knows about it. People sort of monitor what are the stocks that Robinhood folks are buying on a day-to-day or hourly basis. But I think the behavioral finance, or in general behavioral economics, is very important, because all the goods that are, going back to capitalism, everything that's consumed is done from a behavioral perspective, and social media has a large influence, right? So these Instagram influencers can make or break a product, right? So I think that when you sort of combine that with what's going to happen for the company over the next quarter's revenue, if somebody like Kylie Jenner here, or maybe the Bachchan family there says something bad about a product, right? Or a cricketer there says something bad about a product, then that'll affect the revenues, right? So I think behavioral elements are very, very important. And there are many, many sort of elements to it. I hope that sort of answers the question. If there is anything sort of a specific angle to that, I can try again.
Simran, feel free to type in a second question. In the meantime, another question, which I'm sure you hear a lot about, is, with all the concerns around AI and ML that feeds people's fear around something like Skynet, is there any debate about introducing an ethical body around innovation for AI and ML?
I think the governments are trying, right? So my whole philosophy is, so there will be regulation. I mean, there are two kinds of, and that's why I brought up this self-reflection, right? So some of these even in the stock market, NASDAQ and so on, in the old days, they said a lot of the things we can do self-regulation, right? So at the corporate level, at the individual level, at the nation level, there should be either self-regulation, and sometimes that regulation happens via societal mores and so on, right? Um, but those are also changing, right? Here, there was a big focus on HIPAA, healthcare, whatever. But then I think if I'm in a dense apartment building, I have a right to know whether my neighbor has COVID or not, right? Likewise, a lot of these AI challenges or if an algorithm made the decision, can I appeal it, right? So here the consensus seems to be that some countries are now coming up with that. If an algorithm made the decision, a human needs to adjudicate if somebody's not happy about it. But then these are all very arguable things. I think that's why I like the fire metaphor. I mean, there's no universal definition of bias-free, right? Even in lending, and even people have tried to come up with utility functions. What does it mean to be fair, right? And we will continue to sort of see that from a lending perspective, from a bank giving loans, people being helped for healthcare, so these are tough problems. So I think there will be, to answer your folks' question, there will be some regulation. I think it makes sense to have some independent bodies, and it makes sense because a lot of these algorithms are going to travel across borders, and that's a lot of the folks are frustrated that we don't have an international unified response to COVID-19 as well, right? So maybe that's a lesson, that for some of these things that affect everybody equally, and then the bits, like the virus, the bits travel across the world easily. So it may make sense to have a body like the UN perhaps get involved in some of these things.
But then, of course, on the other hand, you have politicians that are actually pulling the carpet from under bodies that do exist for this, right?
Right.
The next question is, what about the future of ML relating to auto ML? So obviously, people joining this field are concerned that, is this job related to machine learning engineer actually going to have any length, given that there's so much talk about automating it through the likes of AutoML or Data Robot and so on?
No, I think, again, there will be use cases for creativity where the human will trump, especially in the next 10, 20, 30 years. I think the human creativity is still going to be very important. I think AutoML will generate, little scripts, how to scrape data, how to maybe clean things up. Those are things the machine can write those scripts easily. There's no reason. Even as I was putting some PowerPoint together, I said there should be, a way for, PowerPoints, go through my PowerPoint presentations and show me things, and I can easily drag and drop, right? I mean, it makes no sense to spend multiple hours to prepare for a 1 hour. Likewise, if it's a throwaway script, if it's a script that's going to be used repeatedly, can you reuse things? Can a human quickly see what has changed and so on? So I think machines will write prose, they'll write code, but the human jobs are still safe. It's like the people have been talking quite a bit about the Boeing plane crashes, and then the self-driving cars, which are going to follow that same paradigm, right? So the risk mitigation there, but there are new jobs opening up there, in the sense a pilot sitting in Seattle can advise a flight that's in midair, right? If these are rookie pilots and they encounter a problem, you can consult with somebody, much like telemedicine, right? Telepiloting, if you will, and so on. So there are a lot of these things. If people are asking, are some jobs going to be taken away by machines? My point is other jobs are going to, more creative, more responsible ones are going to come about, and so on. So likewise, even with these trucks and so on, the self-driving trucks, it's pretty easy for them to go on the highway pretty easily, but a truck backing up in a in a gully in Delhi, or a truck backing up even in my neighborhood, right? The streets are a bit narrow, the 18-wheelers and so on, the guys sometimes struggle, backing things. So that last mile thing can be done by somebody sitting 50 miles away in the comfort of their home, right, sipping coffee and so on, and they can help these trucks, which 90% of the time are in self-driving mode and so on. So think creatively about how to combine man and machine, human and machine.
Mhm. Thank you. One of the things that I've seen over and over again happen is that as algorithms get more intelligent and delivering value to us, there is the other side where there are attacks on those algorithms, right? With Google, we saw the Google bombs at the time of, President Bush, where, we had these examples of, searching for certain phrases that were, associated with President Bush at the time. We saw that in recommender systems as well, where people found ways of attacking these recommender systems and increasing the likelihood of their books or products being recommended by Amazon, where they shouldn't have been recommended. We're seeing examples of that happen in deep learning as well. Do you think there is enough effort being put into looking at securing the AI that is now being adopted in industry and in the real world to ensure that we can really protect these systems from being attacked, in these ways?
No, on the recommender system, Sarab, you're one of the world's leading experts, so you probably know the answer. But unfortunately, I think the more I think about it, I mean, the fact that the op-ed pages are now polluted, Lancet's pages are polluted. I mean, just getting for my teenage daughter, right, who is literate, right, in some sense, all or, but if they want to, Google is hydroxychloroquine effective for COVID, right, you're going to get likewise for a lot of things, right? Should I drive or fly, right? It's a very nuanced whatever, and getting that information, getting that recommendation, if you will, has become harder. And I think with Amazon and so on, even in the old days, they were saying 30 to 40% of the reviews on Amazon or TripAdvisor were fake. And then there were these bots that were trying to evaluate whether these reviews came from a verified purchaser. But then I don't know whether you guys saw this. There's this scam all over the country over the last few weeks. People have received some seeds of Chinese origin. These seeds are fairly benign, but apparently it's a trick to a package has been mailed to a certain address. So for a different product, a gizmo or whatever, you become a verified buyer. So Steve in Arizona can now write a review, but this is somebody sitting in Asia sending seeds. A package was sent to Steve, is all Amazon recognizes. So they're hacking things to come up with better reviews or whatever. But if all the reviews, I've seen products after somebody pointed it out, a lot of there are only 70 reviews for the product, but 60 of them came in the last 3 days or 2 days or whatever. So, it's become spy versus spy, but it's becoming harder to separate wheat from the chaff in all milieus. And I think I worry about it. I think over the last few months, I've gotten convinced that this integrity of information is truly under attack at all levels. It's difficult for politicians. So I think it's getting very difficult for even folks like Trump or Modi to sift through all the information relating to COVID. Even if they mean well, the governments mean well, the scientists mean well, there's no consensus, and especially this fog of war decisions have become much more difficult, and that sort of percolates now to the common man for simple things, right? Like if I come down with this health condition. What should I do? I think the reliability of information has, I think, gone down because of social media, because of all these other effects. And there's no right answer. I think AI has a role. AI plus humans have a role, but I think we're going to figure that out over the next few decades, definitely not in the next couple of years. So it's a ripe area for building more tools, doing more research, definitely.
Great, thank you. I'll take a couple of more questions. I'm aware that we are well over. Here's a very quick question that you could answer. Hopefully, our tech team tried to use NLP open source algorithms to identify and store data related to oil market physical deals, like who bought or bid, who sold or offered, what crude or product was offered, bid, where was the delivery, terms of delivery, and so on. We were not able to find any open source algorithms for this. Could you guide us if there are such libraries available that they could have used in this case?
Short answer is I'd have to look, but I think a lot of these things are, there's the whole alternative data wave. And now one of the best practices I mentioned, blockchain, a lot of the things are moving to blockchain. And that's one way to, as they say, sunlight is a great cleanser, right, of information. So I think blockchain is getting you that sunlight. Things are, transactions are becoming more public. So I think many of these transactions will go on the blockchain and will be curated by the general public at large. But it's a lot of work. I think the Wikipedia pages have generally behaved well, but I think that would be the next destination to get polluted, because humans curate them, but humans can be duped. Even experts can be duped by wrong information, because there's so much of it, much like we talked about the stock market, the voting effects and sort of the weighing, the value effects, the voting effects are, because algorithms abhor a vacuum, right? So on your Facebook feed, if there's nothing available, it just shows you something that's popular instead of parroting back something that is that should be repeated. And that's sort of, even in scientific publishing, there's this debate, right? There's this trade-off between novelty, which should be brought to the surface, versus replicability and standardization, and getting the right trade-off between the two. Because a lot of the scientists would say, well, I already know it, but if there's a slightly more efficient process and it's been somebody, 8 other people have replicated it, that's actually very good to know. But then suddenly a novel paper is the one that shows up on the cover because, and there are incentives, right? I mean, that makes the magazine or the publication more or whatever, because they publish novel result. So novelty versus standardization and reproducibility is something to be thinking about as well.
Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of other questions, Ganesh, but I think we should probably bring this session to a close. If you don't mind, I might just ship some of these questions out to you and ship them back to the students later if that works for you. Because I think they're all looking like good, valid questions. But I'm very aware of the fact that we've into a over.
It's your call. If you want to take a couple more, if they're interesting, I'm happy to go for a couple more minutes.
Brilliant.
Or if you want to ship them to me, we can or take it up in a subsequent session as well.
Sure. So actually, one of our students who's from Nigeria is very interested in getting advice on AI startups in developing countries. He's very keen to bring AI as a service within his country. And what would your advice be to him? In a very greenfield site for AI, what should he do?
Yeah, so 3 quick points there. Actually, one of the emails I need to send is to a startup in India called Cropin, right? I think it stands for Crop Intelligence, I believe, run by a gentleman called Krishna Kumar, I think. I listened to one of their talks the other day on a panel. So look up companies like Cropin and in general ag tech, which I think has a lot of application to emerging markets. But two things from my sphere of influence. Now, there is a CMU Africa, so you can sort of Google it, which is, I think, a couple of years old. There's a whole sort of startup ecosystem around that. And I know Sarah, myself, we're all involved in the TIE, the Indus Entrepreneurs. So I think TIE has a new chapter. I don't know whether it's HQ'd in Nairobi or where, but those are for the startups, especially. I would look up the Thai chapter and see whether you can make some contacts there, and then look up CMU Africa. They're always looking for good students, good entrepreneurs to interact with the researchers there.
Thank you for that. What is the need for augmented intelligence if there is already artificial intelligence? More precisely, what is the difference between AI and augmented intelligence according to you?
Yeah, so we sort of covered this earlier, right? Humans are still good at a number of different things: negotiation, creativity, diplomacy, and sort of enforcing that command, control, ethics, and so on. And AI is good at sort of replicating some smart numeric things, sorting through a lot of multimedia and maybe showing you some things, right? I mean, my frustration is, even if you do a Google search, right off the bat, you don't know the document or the multimedia piece that's highlighted. What's the vintage? When was that produced? What's the authority behind it, right? So if you're searching for something relating to health information, was that produced by a reputed doctor, right? What's the there's a vintage, authority? Those are still, hard to figure out. So, so I think that's why you need humans and machines to be teaming.
Thank you. There's a lot of talk about Google, AWS, IBM, Microsoft having cloud services that are available for AI and machine learning. So can a startup really play in this space, given that we have all of these companies that have a lot of access to a lot of resources and data? Do you really feel that there is opportunities for startups to make a dent?
Yeah, absolutely. So you should think of the platform element of Amazon and Google, and especially the cloud hosting and the ability to keep the data in one place and move it around pretty facilely, I think reduces the cost for a startup. I think clever algorithms, clever ways of combining this sort of human sentiment plus, the ability for startups to facilitate that human-machine teaming, but then host it on AWS, hosted on Google Cloud, and so on, and use all the information. I mean, Google and now Geo is the platform effects are real. Now there's a big debate about whether platforms have that winner-take-all ability right now. Geo is sort of the biggest thing that's being talked about. I mean, they raised $20 billion, right, in the pandemic. But teaming with them, making it easy for the Geo platform or Amazon or Google to use whatever you come up with could be interesting. So I think API, we didn't talk about APIs, but APIs are becoming very important, because again, when machines and humans team, you need facile APIs. You also need a common language. Those are things that are becoming important. But I would leverage these platforms to bring in your particular feature to be implemented and executed cheaply using that platform. I would leverage that platform that way.
Thank you. And the last question, when we talk about AI and machine learning limitations due to the availability of data to feed the ML, is any progress being made with something in the middle? What I mean by that is something like tapping into the human body or mind to build a generative model.
You mean sort of a physical connection to the human brain, or sort of an iterative process?
Sukhdeep, do you want to actually even unmute yourself and answer that?
Yeah, so what I see is like, when I, especially just learning and from Saurabh and from the class right now, we're seeing that there's limitations to AI and machine learning where, it's all based on the data and that's available. And a lot of that times, based on the population and where we're grabbing some of that data, it's not the full picture. So, like, is there, I guess, progress being made, or is that even possible? Is that even being discussed right now, where we can tap into kind of almost like real time and have that physical connection with somebody, and what's going on in their head to kind of generate these models on the fly? So yeah, very much the physical aspect.
Yeah, so I think there are some things that you may not be able to express, right? Or there's the ersatz version of that, right? So wearables or whatever, right? You don't know what your heart rate is or what your pulse rate is and so on, but a wearable can sort of imply that pretty quickly. And likewise, there are people working on, I think, all the way from Elon Musk to, I think, I'm on somebody's mailing list, kernel.io or something like that. So they've come up with a thing to tap into sort of these implantables, right? And then there was a NYU professor, I think, wearing an implantable and then going around collecting additional data. So there is something to be said for, and then I saw a headline yesterday that said scientists were saying finally they can actually follow some wild animals from literally birth to death, right? Because they put a little IoT device on the animal. They could never sort of follow one particular animal from birth to death because it wasn't recognizable and all that. So people are doing that. So I think there are a lot of these devices, some invasive, some not so invasive, that'll be part of this ecosystem. But also you should pay attention to what I said earlier with respect to this proactive intelligence, right? We had a large project around that, which the proactive intelligence premise was, what additional data can I collect? What is the cost of it? What is the benefit of it? So you actually proactively seek. The best example is sort of homeland security type of whatever, right? So the US, that's how it was first explained to me. You see some potentially nefarious activities, say in North Korea or in Iran or whatever, an unfriendly geography. So you got some intelligence via satellite. So what is the next step, right? Could you do you want to send a drone? Do you want to send a human being, a human spy, right? They all have, or do you want to send actual soldiers like a battalion, right? So they all have human costs, geopolitical costs, and so on. Because if a drone goes there and they find out a drone is spying, then they could react to it, whatever, right? So you have to gauge the costs of that. And again, in this sort of COVID-19 thing, we're talking about it, right? Can we do random testing? Should we provide incentives to folks to get tested and so on? So that doing that cost benefit analysis to collect additional data that you've convinced yourself is going to be useful is a very interesting area of research.
These implants are still at the level of really collecting, data, right? And so labeling of that data in some way, and then consumption of that by machine learning models still remains kind of similar to what we are doing today. I think Sukhdeep was wondering whether there is actually some research going on where we can actually, in some ways, suck out human knowledge, right? Domain knowledge and expertise in some form to actually embed that within the artificial intelligence.
Right. No, so I think people are working on this sort of connection to extract useful information that can then meld with an AI algorithm. But I think I see a number of different problems there. So there are these fMRI things which can tell you whether somebody is excited about it. They can't verbalize it, but you know that they're excited about that product, or they're going to take on more risk, right, on a trading desk. So that trader needs to, he's not a money-making trader, but gets excited. We're all so he or she is taking on risk but hasn't been rewarded for it, right? So the rewards hadn't been, so then you can throttle them down or you can give feedback or whatever. But I think the basic problem is with human machine teaming is the representations we use, right? And sort of you referred to GANs and so on. And I think part of it's useful. I mean, they put little yellow Post-its on stop signs or whatever, right? Well, I've seen graffiti on the stop signs here. Usually no human driver gets confused, right? I mean, that's why you have the shape of the stop sign, you have the color, there's redundancy there for humans, and that's what. And sometimes the stop sign is sort of turned around, bent, whatever, but humans typically recognize it very well. That's because our representation systems are a little different. The machine representations of those are very brittle and they are very different. And now, so even if you download some things from the human brain, the machines of today won't be able to use it. So we need getting that interface right and combining the two things. And some of these things need to be done in real time. So, your human reaction times are whatever, quarter second, half a second, right? So sometimes they're too late. And that's what came out even in the, so people talk about the Boeing crashes, but there is the Air France, I think it's 447 that crashed 10 years ago. This was a flight that had taken off from South America, was headed to Charles de Gaulle. If you Google popular mechanics, Air France, a crash, you'll get the voice transcript. It's fascinating reading. There's a rookie pilot at the controls. The captain, because it's a long flight, has gone to sleep, and rightfully so, in the crew rest cabin. And the machine's actually giving the rookie pilot the right answer, but it's like sometimes some family members who talk too much, you end up ignoring them, right? So this rookie pilot ignores the voice command, but the machine doesn't know that the pilot hasn't gotten the message, right? So it's fascinating reading. And then at the last T-minus 90 seconds or whatever, finally the rookie pilot tells the flight attendant to go wake up the captain, right? So imagine now this captain coming out of deep slumber, right? Very experienced, coming into the cockpit, the plane's diving, all the alarms are going off, and the rookie pilot's trying to convey something in 2 or 3 seconds, but the machine still can do the right thing, except the machine doesn't know what the state of interaction of the humans are. So that's, just Google popular mechanics, AF447. There's the whole voice transcript translated from French to English. That'll spark some thought. I forwarded it recently to some people. Maybe I can send it to Sarab later. So those are some things you need to be thinking about. But I think, so here Herb Simon used to say, to solve these puzzles, right? I mean, there are these sort of puzzles about you cut the 2 corners of the chessboard, right? And there are certain things with knights or queens, some problems around it, or there's this puzzle about, you guys can think about it. I can send you the answer. There is a hiker going up the hill today, sleeps at the top of the hill, and then comes down the hill tomorrow, right? And the question is there a place on the hill where he's at the same place at the same time on 2 consecutive days, right? So is there a point on the hill where the next day when he's coming down, he can point to his watch and say, exactly at this time, I was at this point going up, right? So to solve that puzzle, actually, if you get the representation right, it's very easy. And I'll give you the answer to that. It's so imagine today when you're going up, there's a twin that's walking down the hill, right? So where you meet your twin today, is exactly what would have happened tomorrow, right? So when you and your twin meet today, you can say, yes, there is a point, and that's where that meeting tomorrow would have happened, where you would have mused that whatever. So getting that representation right is very important to reasoning or solving the problem. That was sort of Herb Simon's insight. So my point is human brain, the human representations are very different from the machine representations. Even to get this puzzle right, try to write an AI program, you'll come up with very different representations, and it becomes a very hard problem to solve. So some of them, if you get the representation right, and if you have the same language between humans and machines, then the teaming will become easier and so on. So hopefully, a long-winded answer, hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. And thank you for the webinar. Thank you for taking out the time and extending it the way we have greedily asked you to extend it. So thanks again. I just love some of the slides that you've got there in terms of, future challenges. I hope that that's going to really excite some of the students that are listening to your webinar, and also those that are going to consume the video after, because we do make it available on our learning platform, and of course it's also available on our YouTube channel. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, and like I said, it just covered so many elements here. Very highly multidimensional presentation. That I think students are really going to benefit from this. So thank you so much again, and I hope that you'll give us some of your valuable time again sometime to bring you to talk about a different subject with them in the near future.
My pleasure, Sarah. Thanks for enthusing the youngsters, and to the youngsters, go forth and conquer the world. There are a number of interesting things for you to do. So I look forward to many innovations coming out of your circle of influence, Sarah.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.